Carolina and Victor, okay? So I'm gonna say a few words to start. First of all, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Leite. I'm the president of Alumni PPGEM Brazilian Naval College. And in the name of the alumni team, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here with us today. And I thank especially Mr. Jeffrey Parfitt for the opportunity to learn and debate about your valuable knowledge, experiences, and perceptions on maritime studies. I thank especially equally the PPGEM for all the support. And at last but not least, I thank in my name the alumni crew for making possible this webinar come true. We are in troubled moments in the world, but I stay happy to see how we can join our efforts and make things come true and make life goes on. So I'd like to say specifically some words about the main idea behind the alumni objectives for this year. We are looking for creating and consolidating ties and dialogue spaces. And in doing so, we are considering not only the relationship between alumni and our students and former students and colleagues, but equally the entire PPGEM community and the entire maritime community. This possibility of exchange between the diverse actors, agents, areas, and sectors in our epistemological community is not only the base of an alumni initiative, but is equally an opportunity to all of us, professionals of the area, to enhance our capability of identifying and solving problems from our specific areas and from the society in general. So this webinar is the first event of alumni in 2020 and is the first of a series that aims and is based on addressing maritime studies issues and in creating and enhancing that possibility of dialogue, that possibility of exchange. So I hope you enjoy. The Alumni 2020 team is open to ideas, to feedbacks, to partnerships, proposals, and so feel free to dialogue with us. We are here for it. And thank you for listening. And it's a pleasure having you here. Now I give the floor to Victor Gaspar Filho, who's gonna guide us to the next hours with Mr. Parfitt.
Is everybody hearing me well? Okay. It is a pleasure to moderate the first webinar of this series on behalf of the alumni of the graduate program of in Maritime Studies of the Brazilian Naval War College. We would like to thank everyone for coming to the lecture Maritime Safety and Security with Captain Jeff Parfitt. Mr. Parfitt is broadcasting from England, which I believe is socially distant enough during the pandemic. Captain Parfitt is a professional mariner since 1976, serving on tankers and general cargo ships, and he readily accepted our invitation to talk about maritime safety and security. 30 years ago, he started a position as a government specialist investigator in England. In 1996, he returned to an offshore post, working with dynamic positioning and serving on subsea construction vessels operating in the North Sea and worldwide. Today, Captain Parfitt works as a consultant to the offshore and global maritime insurance industry. He is the director of the maritime sector of the Confidential Human Factors Incident Reporting Program, Chirp. He is a fellow of the Nautical Institute, a liveryman of the Honorable Company of Master Mariners, and a novelist, with 5 books being sold on Amazon. Captain Parfitt's presentation will address questions previously sent by the audience. Some of the questions encompass sustainability, COVID-19, piracy, and the Solas Treaty. The captain's presentation will last up to an hour, and then we will open for new questions. We encourage any member of the audience who wants to send a question during the lecture to do so by clicking the Q&A button, then selecting my name. I will organize groups of questions and address them to Mr. Parfitt afterwards. So without further ado, Captain Parfitt, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Victor. You know more about me than I do. So good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of Chirp Maritime, thank you very much for your generous invitation to address the PPGEM. It's a very prestigious organisation, and it is an honour for us. And of course, it is our first webinar with any South American organisation. So it's very important for us as well. I would ask you to keep an open mind with my comments. We would like to think we can assist one another. You're welcome to suggest any initiatives you think we should maybe pick up on, and you are welcome to any assistance from ourselves if we're able to offer you any advice or guidance. And was particularly interested in your wanting to open dialogue with other organizations, and I may be able to assist with that when this is finished. So we'll carry on, and I will just give you a small introduction to Chirp Maritime before we actually start the main thrust of this afternoon's talk. As soon as I can change the slide. Okay. So Chirp Maritime then is the Confidential Human Factors Incident Reporting Programme. It is a non-profit UK-registered charitable organisation, and we exist to disseminate safety lessons from received near-miss reports to the global mariner. Chirp Maritime is the world's foremost maritime confidential human factors programme. We see ourselves as a voice of the mariner that would otherwise not be heard, and we answer every report submitted. We try and harvest reports from all disciplines, from pleasure industry, fishing, superyacht, commercial, military, and offshore. And we validate our reports first by a two-way engagement to make sure there is no malicious intent or motivation behind the reports. We say the reports we receive are not sanitized. They haven't passed through any company or governmental system. They are direct from the reporter, and that is why we say we are the voice of the mariner. If we find the information in the report appropriate, we will discuss it with the relevant agencies, whether that's the flag state, the shipping companies, the classification societies, whatever, in order to try and find a resolution. We only use disidentified information so that the reporter is not identified and the confidentiality of the reporter is assured, and we do not publish particulars that may embarrass a shipping company or the flag state. That's not what we're about. We're about learning safety lessons and the resolution of some of these issues. We don't retain personal details. Once a report is closed, we delete them from our database, and this way even we cannot contact the reporter, and in so doing it keeps the number of live reports open on our database to a minimal, so should, in the event that we have a security breach, only a very small amount of information could ever be accessed. Once we have these reports, we publish our safety feedback in hard copy every 3 months. We do around 60,000 copies in English. There are some Filipino and Chinese hard copies, but digitally we publish in 4 languages: English, Chinese, Filipino, and Portuguese. We use Facebook. We publish an annual digest magazine. We make videos and produce specialist insight articles on subjects. It's all freely available from our website. We do not make money from any of the information we provide, but most importantly, there is no government hand in our organization. So, our primary objectives are to manage confidential reporting systems for the maritime transportation and the collection of safety-related issues and near-miss reports. And we raise awareness of these issues by publishing our feedback. We analyse data and identify trends where we can, and we advise interested bodies on human factors relevant to maritime transport safety with the aim of improving safety for those who work at sea or with the sea. And it is a no-blame culture. We have no vested interest and we maintain total independence. In order to achieve this, we harvest our money from core sponsors, and this is who we are currently funding our organisation. The ones that may be of interest to alumni like yourselves are Lloyd's Register Foundation. Lloyd's Register, which is a classification society, is the biggest charity in the UK, turning over £1 billion a year. And they actually have a particular interest in financing academic research in maritime issues. So although they finance us, and we're not academic, they particularly like to finance academic studies, and may well be of interest to you. So moving on to the main talk of this afternoon, a series of questions and answers on maritime safety and security. I was forwarded a number of questions, the basic outline of the topics, as you can see, and I've grouped together some of the questions to make it easier to answer. So the first topic is COVID-19, and there's a picture we're all now familiar with. And part of these questions, what are the measurements adopted regarding COVID-19 pandemic in order to secure the physical integrity and health of crews? And how effective were these measurements? How effective is SOLAS, and is there a way of amending SOLAS regarding COVID-19? And how has COVID-19 affected maritime work? So COVID-19 then. The maritime world is by and large at the mercy of port authorities and governmental requirements of the ports and the countries that they visit. So being at sea, for the vast majority of time, crews tend to be healthy because they are naturally isolated in their work environment. It is the interaction of crews and port personnel which introduces the risk of crews catching the virus. There were two recent cases, one in Norfolk, USA, and one in Antwerp, Belgium, where crews tested positive. In the Antwerp case, the vessel had visited Greece 14 days beforehand, which is most likely where the crew picked up the virus. If you wind that forward 14 days, the crew were then showing signs, the classic signs we now know of COVID, the cough, the fever, these sort of things. Was the master aware of it before entering Antwerp? Nobody will actually know. But for hundreds of years, it is normal practice for ships to declare they are healthy when they arrive in port. They declare their quarantine and request free pratique to enter a port. And in all I was nearly 37 years at sea, I never once had a moment where we were never healthy to enter port. So what has happened this year is extremely rare. Well, it's never happened in my career. So declaring that you are a healthy vessel on arrival is normal. However, things have rapidly changed this year, and the whole life at sea has changed, affecting global trade and global seafarers. So a ship is subject to quarantine measures when it arrives, and it declares whether it has sick crew or not sick crew. And really the rules are similar to that ashore. If it's healthy, the ship goes alongside, starts its operations, and the social distancing you have now become accustomed to would be the same for a ship and the interaction of shore personnel. The problem is with the cruise industry has shown the biggest problem. That slide I showed you was the Symphony of the Seas. The Symphony of the Seas is the biggest passenger ship on the planet, and it has 7,000 passengers and 2,000 crew. So you're talking 9,000 people on that ship. How can you possibly socially isolate 9,000 people on that ship? It just isn't possible. And this is where we've really had problems with this virus. So the cruise industry is different from the rest of the commercial maritime world. The containers, tankers, general cargo with smaller crews are much easier to manage, much easier to segregate the crew. So the cruise ships were caught in the early stages of the pandemic where testing was not done and transmission rates were unknown, with the net result that cruise operations were cancelled or suspended. There's also a suspicion that some cruise operators continued to operate in the hope that the virus would just dissipate in the way they deal with standard flu issues, which they always get. So there was a knee-jerk reaction from port states, and that was to deny shore and crew transfers in order to isolate crew and passengers from the local communities. This wasn't to protect the crew, it was to protect the local communities. And you may remember earlier this year, a ship arriving in Japan and the US with confirmed cases, and passengers were confined to the vessels. The Diamond Princess was the most notorious, with over 700 confirmed cases on board and 14 deaths. It was detained in Yokohama in February. And then there was the Grand Princess, same company, with 120 confirmed cases and 7 deaths in Oakland, USA during March. So this in turn has set up a general policy throughout the world to contain any onboard infections by isolation from the local communities. In other words, we want the ships to keep trading, but we can't help you. So you have to stay on your ship, we'll take your cargo, but then go away. We can't actually assist you with your crew changes or whatever it is you need. You need to go to the next port. And this resulted very quickly in a huge backlog of outstanding crew changes, with the ITF estimating that there were 150,000 seafarers trapped at sea. That's the International Transport Federation, by the way, who are a global organization of transport unions, the biggest in the world, no doubt. And they now estimate that there's over 250,000 seafarers trapped at sea. The International Chamber of Shipping have just stated they believe there are over 400,000 seafarers stranded at sea who have overrun their contracts or are at shore waiting to start. Now, the significance of that is the longer people are on board, it is denying seafarers ashore making their living. So it's a double-edged sword. You're having seafarers who cannot get home and are way beyond their tours, who are desperate to get home, and you have seafarers ashore who are desperate to start their job, who cannot earn a living. So the International Chamber of Shipping said their efforts are designed to highlight that seafarers are still not classified as key workers in many countries. And that is the main point. I don't know if you use that term in Brazil, but key workers is the main point. And if seafarers are designated as key workers, they are expedited through quarantine in international countries. Air crew are, sea crew are not. So shipping companies responded in a predictable fashion by making expected amendments to their safety management procedures, emphasizing sanitation and hygiene precautions, along with the IMO endorsing various agency statements. But the end result was isolation for most seafarers and a complete lack of compassion for those trapped at sea, essentially being the main point that mariners were not identified as key workers and should have been. And so that so you understand what that means. If you have to make a crew change, that means first of all you have to find available flights that are largely cancelled, that the joining crew have to quarantine 14 days before they join that vessel. And then the off-going crew, the off-signing crew, have to quarantine 14 days before they can travel. So logistically, it is a nightmare. And there are only some countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, the UK, I think Spain. There are only some countries who have responded in a positive light to try and move these seafarers on. Not forgetting there are no hotels open, there's very limited flights. And so what we're finding is that seafarers are stuck on board way beyond their tours of duty. Regarding SOLAS, the amendment of SOLAS, which has been raised in one of your questions because of COVID-19, in order to make an amendment to SOLAS, it would take at least 18 months moving amendments through the IMO, because it's the nature of the regulatory process. So you understand there are 174 member states at the IMO in London. 174, and the place is closed. It's being done like this, it's webinars. And to try and get 174 member states to agree on amending SOLAS for COVID-19, it's just logistically impossible. The challenges are enormous. And just to give you an idea of how slow the IMO can move, the Titanic sank in 1912. The subsequent investigation made 100 safety recommendations. To date, 12 have been ratified. So that gives you an idea of how fast the IMO move. With respect to the challenges of COVID-19 and the operation in maritime trade and what is normal, maritime trade and the routine repatriation of ships' personnel after their contract has expired. Well, I've actually more or less just covered that. I don't wish to, don't want to repeat myself there. But I have friends in the offshore world where 6-week trips have now surpassed 6 months with no end in sight. And some of the deep sea seafarers on 9-month trips are now beyond 12-month trips. There is a belief amongst those who've never actually been to sea that doing another month is easy. Well, they've done 6 months, just do another 4 weeks. I can tell you that it is not easier for a seaman to be away from home than it is for anyone else. They miss their families just the same, and many only do the job for economic reasons. And if you add to this the stress of not knowing whether the family is safe or whether they are well through these very difficult times, it adds to serious welfare issues for seafarers. And we are seeing a huge increase in mental health issues with depression being a major factor, and we are now getting regular reports of suicides. This is particularly noticeable in the cruise industry, where crew members are often many to a cabin. They don't even have personal space. This has been taken on by the IMO, the International Labour Organization, ITF and ICS, amongst others, where concerns have been repeatedly voiced and demands made to give seafarers this key worker status. But it's a lot of talk and not a lot of action, quite frankly. We will see how it progresses, but it is very slow. And what we're now seeing is that some vessels, supported by the International Transport Federation, are now actually going on strike. And that has never happened before. Some ships have diverted to port, and all these are variations that we've never experienced. And I have to say that in a cynical world, there has been an advantage to shipping companies. Some of the big players have arbitrarily announced that tours will be extended for the benefit and safety of the crew, whereas in fact, there are huge cost savings to be made on crew transport, visas, agency fees. So the resultant effect is that there are hundreds of thousands of seafarers who need to go home and those who need to go to work. Certainly, if you go to sea for a living these days, you need to think twice about how long you are prepared to serve, as the rule book has been torn up. So we, Chirp Maritime, got on board with this quite early, and we produced these 3 papers. We are very lucky. We have a maritime advisory board of around 30 members who who cover a broad expertise. We don't claim by any means to be experts in everything, but what we can do is reach out to people who are experts, and maybe those people are you. And that's what we do. We network and pull in the expertise to give the best possible advice we can access. So our first paper was Trapped by COVID-19, and we sent that, we put that out globally, and we also then produced general advice to masters and crew, which one of our members is a maritime doctor, director at a Norwegian medicine school, and she wrote that for us. And that was a quick advisory to masters and crew on how to deal with COVID if you get it on board. But the principal paper, The Seafarer Wellbeing, is a 32-page booklet produced by a maritime psychologist, also a member of our advisory board, Dr. Claire Petchen. And we were able to distribute tens of thousands of hard copies of this, as well as digitally to 50,000 member vessels and numerous other digital outlets. And all these are available from our website digitally. And that's the sort of thing that we do. And I have to say, it was very well received by our sponsors, which is also important to us. And that concludes the COVID-19 talk. As we now move on to one of the favorites, piracy. Piracy is an emotive subject, and we received several questions on this. What is the latest suggestions on how to prevent drilling rigs from piracy? Countries that enforce laws against piracy, some of them have been able to overcome it. Have they made any profit from this? And what current strategies to prevent incidents involving pirate attacks? The topic of piracy is complex at best, and there are no easy answers. So let's have a little look at the drilling rigs. Excuse me. When we talk about drilling rigs, we include the latest generation of drill ship. Some of you may be familiar with offshore operations, as Brazil does really big deep water subsea construction. Probably really the biggest projects in the world are off Brazil for the ultra deep water subsea construction. And so these vessels are capable of conducting drilling operations in 10,000 feet of water depth. And these vessels are very large, mono-hulled, with a large freeboard, and some of the semi-subs are just too difficult to access because of their design, and they may be well out to sea. However, that is not impossible for the determined border. In fact, a pirate attack in the Gulf of Guinea last week was 140 miles offshore. So I'm not quite sure how far out pirates are prepared to go. But drill vessels are very expensive units, and they can be targeted as a serious ransom prize. These ultra deep water vessels can be up to $1 billion in their building costs. So, you know, you can see the sort of money that's at play here. But because of their design, they're not easily accessible, but that can work in two ways. If the pirates do get on board, it becomes difficult to mount any assault by intervention forces. Jack-up drill units are often much smaller, tend to work in shallower water, which is closer to land and potentially more accessible and vulnerable to attack. It's also usual to have ladders attached to the legs, and they can access the rig directly from the sea. So Chirp Maritime is aware that for some time, ultra-deep water drill operations in West Africa have been using private armed security, even in areas where there is little to no reports of activity, such as Senegal. This is partly to act as a deterrent and partly as reassurance to the crew. There are many of these private security companies in operation, and the costs have come down due to the lessening of activities in the Gulf of Aden. There appears to be no shortage of available former military personnel to conduct the work. Chirp Maritime is also aware of the rising violence in the Gulf of Guinea, and there are several reports of fatalities from armed engagement with these pirates. Piracy tends to be different in various parts of the world, from simple robbery, which we used to call it was just localized crime. I would never regard the boarding in Suez Canal as piracy. They were just local criminals trying to rob your cabin. But these days, piracy seems to be a generic term applied to all crime on all forced crime on the sea. So it's from simple robbery to hijacking vessels off Somalia, holding the crews for ransom for payment. In the Gulf of Guinea, the threat from piracy is more of a concern, as at this time, pirates are much more ruthless than those of Somalia, where keeping the crew alive was the premise for ransom. In the Gulf of Guinea, ransacking the vessel and taking crew hostage is the aim, and if some crew are casualties during the attack, then the pirates are not concerned in the slightest. I think it's true to say that the Gulf of Guinea piracy is considerably more violent than the Gulf of Aden was. In the Far East, armed robbery is on the increase, and to a lesser extent, cargo theft. There has actually been a recent incident you may or may not be aware of. They're calling it piracy in Ecuador. In April, excuse me, armed raiders boarded a container ship as it entered Guayaquil. They fired warning shots towards the ship's bridge, boarded the ship, and ransacked a few containers before emptying the contents and speeding away in speedboats. Well, Ecuador isn't a hotspot of global piracy, but armed robbers regularly attack ships in and around Guayaquil, and ships that transit the narrow river passages are easy prey for criminal gangs. But as the Guayaquil attack hints, this report says pirates may be getting more active, and they're saying it could be down to COVID-19. The first 3 months of 2020 has seen a 24% increase in pirate attacks and attempted attacks over the same period last year. And the counter-piracy successes, well, it tends to involve pirates in small, fast boats approaching slow-moving, larger vessels in order to seize the crew. In 2008, the Gulf of Aden was the hotspot in the world, but it is now rapidly become the Gulf of Guinea. Countries that enforce laws against piracy that have been able to overcome it? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. International law generally has territorial waters that extend only 12 miles offshore. Outside of that, a country has no jurisdiction. So the answer has been an international effort. That was what was needed to counter the piracy in the Gulf of Aden. If we take Somalia as an example, the piracy grew out of illegal fishing. There was no Somali navy to police the waters, fishermen lost trade and resorted to other methods. The initial piracy was limited to fishing vessels and grew from there when crime bosses saw the opportunity. Somalia was a failed state and it needed international response to help. And it came from the UN-backed initiatives with navies from many countries taking part. I actually did two transits myself in 2010 and 2011, and there were, I think, 17 different nationalities of warships. I thought there was only NATO ships there, but when I got there, there were Chinese, Russians, the Oman Navy was there, the Indians were there, and none of them were working together because the Chinese are not going to work for the Americans, and likewise the Russians. So they were all conducting their own operations, but I have to say I was very glad to see them, as you will happily follow any warship when you're in the middle of it. So in the case of Somalia, merchant companies finally turned to the assistance of armed guards. It wasn't allowed in 2010 and 11. In fact, insurance companies refused to insure you if you were armed. It didn't work. They needed armed guards on board, and this needed to be policed to ensure effective measures were in place to control the armed guards, because of course there was no law really controlling them. So despite all of this, pirates have never found a solution to defeating armed security on board vessels. But make no mistake, the problem has not been solved. It's just been suppressed. So do countries have any profit with piracy? Well, another way of putting the question is whether piracy is state-sponsored. For Somalia, it was a straight fact that a couple of government personnel were arrested and charged with laundering offences related to piracy. This was the UN initiative to track the money. And it is also true that al-Shabaab exerted a lot of influence over parts of Somalia where the pirates had to pay taxes to keep them in order and being left alone. So there was a lot of organised crime going on there. There are also a lot of conflicts of interest in the Gulf of Guinea with allegations of corruption in high circles. To date, there has been no international response to the Gulf of Guinea. And a lot of that is the countries will not allow international armed guards within their waters. Nigeria absolutely will not permit it, although you can employ local armed guards. So current strategies, how to help, and this may be of use to some of you who perhaps are researching maritime security in commercial shipping. The main area for company advice is something called best management practice, and the latest edition is BMP 5. It has been produced by various major organizations, as you can see sponsoring the slide there, OCIMF, BIMCO, IMCA, big organizations like that, and this has been issued and it lists precautions that vessels should adhere to, advice for masters and companies when transiting the areas. Note that these precautions may differ for different parts of the world, where the modus operandi of the pirates are different. There is an International Maritime Bureau piracy reporting hotline. The Gulf of Aden, Gulf of Oman and Arabian Gulf is monitored by the UK, but there is also a centre for the Gulf of Guinea, and these reporting centres promulgate the latest information and advice on what to do and how to avoid pirate attacks. But the obvious answer is to avoid trading. Avoid trading in these areas that have known violent pirate activity. A response from drilling companies is to offer increased salaries as incentives, but for trading vessels, this is often not an option, as they are mainly crewed by seafarers who are socially, economically dependent upon the work, and they have no choice if they wish to earn a living. So Chirp Maritime sees a symmetry between security and safety, a fine balance where the objective of one can affect and influence the outcome of the other. And I will, that actually is a later topic, security and safety. But when I did my transits through the Gulf of Aden, I had to make a call on whether it was safer to armour the vessel and protect it from boarders, or maintain the operational safety integrity of the vessel by observing SOLAS regulations. In the risk assessment I conducted, I decided it was safer to armour the vessel with barbed wire, steel spears, welded covers over windows and bars across the bridge windows. There were barriers under lifeboats and the stairways were boarded off. We were not attacked, but any internal emergency would have been more difficult to deal with. But that was a judgment call based on what I thought was the lesser of the two evils. Another question was, may we suggest important bibliography about this lecture's subject? There is so much information out there. So I will simply recommend our own website, and of course, you're absolutely free to contact us with any requests you want, and we will do our best to support you and point you in the right direction. But on our website, we have a reference library. And for those of you who may perhaps be researching accidents, incidents in the maritime world, it's a one-stop shop where we have pulled in 16 of the top maritime accident investigation agencies and put all their reports in one place. So by going to that reference library, it'll save you going to 16 other websites. There's also an alert section, which is great for exploring human factors. We also publish a lot of academic papers and insight articles. There's also some videos They're all free. You can download and do what you want with them or not. And you can also see a copy of our maritime feedback, and there it is in Portuguese. So that brings me on to another question: responsibilities for firefighting. And the question that we had was, which government agencies in the UK are responsible for supporting the extinction of fires in vessels? Well, in general terms, it is not a single government organisation that is responsible for supporting the extinction of a fire on a vessel. Really, it starts with the IMO regulation. All ship's crews should and must be trained in extinguishing fires. Effectively, all seafarers should be firemen, trained firemen. Then there are rules in SOLAS to prevent a fire occurring in the first place. But should a fire break out, then the shipping company will have procedures in place on how to tackle the fire. It's under the ISM code and the document of compliance. And this will include emergency numbers to contact, and the port authorities will also have provided this information to the ship on arrival. And this is more or less standard practice in most ports in the world, including Brazil. But the principal agency that governs maritime affairs in the UK is the Government Civil Service Agency, the MCA, a Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. And the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency have oversight of the procedures that are in place for port operations and all ships in the UK and UK ships. Ships have a key meeting with shore personnel on arrival and the procedures to follow in the event of emergencies such as fire. Ultimately, it is up to the flag state to enforce the regulations on board their ships through regular inspections and audits. Additionally, of course, the national administrations inspect through port state control. So firefighting is a term that encapsulates many issues in the event of a fire. Remembering that vessels arriving in the UK are subject to scrutiny and inspection from flag state surveyors, private condition surveys, class surveyors and port state control. And this is the same no matter what country. And I know from my time in Brazil, I think I'm right in saying it is the Brazilian Navy that enforce commercial requirements. They certainly did in the offshore world, and they certainly inspected my ship and were very tough on us, enforcing the Brazilian requirements. And I remember that clearly. So every vessel will be flagged in class and will comply with the minimum standards of their respective license. And this includes crew training as well as equipment and design. It is not unusual for a flag surveyor to arrive without notice and demand a fire and emergency drill or a security drill on the spot, and the captain must respond immediately, and his response and the competence of the crew will be tested. That is not an uncommon event, and perhaps even launching a lifeboat. The problem arises with the broad license given to training and requirements. The ISM code was originally introduced to set a minimum standard that ship operators should build upon and not fall below. However, the minimum standard has now become the norm, as it allows ship operators not to invest any more into facilities and crew training than it has to. So with the advent of computer-based training rather than physical training being accepted, and the reduction in manning, it means that the minimum manning of vessels and the actual physical training of crews has been cut to a minimum. And a lot of seafarers, a lot of masters would say it was not safe. So the ability to respond to an emergency, such as a fire, has become severely hampered by the number of available crew and their level of competence. So let me ask you a question. The biggest container ship in the world is a Maersk EEE class, which is capable of carrying 20,600 20-foot containers. That vessel is 1,300 foot long and can steam at 27 knots. Is it safe? Can a crew of 16 efficiently respond to a serious emergency on that ship, such as a fire or accommodation fire? Or perhaps Perhaps you can answer that one. I know what my thoughts are. So we're going to jump to security and safety. I'll just keep an eye on the clock to make sure I get through this quick enough. Many people from the maritime industry say that security is safety. What are your comments on it? Well, it's a very good point, actually. And it is not just safety and security, but HSSE includes health and environment as well. So I have previously mentioned the symmetry between security and safety, and they are intertwined but also opposed. The failure to maintain adequate security is a safety issue. How can it not be? If the lives of the crew are threatened, then it has to be unsafe. We tend to identify safety with the safety of operations, risk assessing our daily work requirements, and adapting training, design, and equipment around the requirements to make our work environment a safer place. These requirements are then enshrined in SOLAS, ISM, STCW, safety management systems. But these peacetime requirements do not take into account acts of violence against the crew. This is more like wartime requirements, when the physical survival of the individual is paramount, where the risk of one outweighs the risk of the other. I mean, after all, warships are not designed with the safety of operations in mind, quite the opposite. They're designed to be unobtrusive, small, crowded, but efficient war machines. You do not see lifeboats down the sides of new destroyers and aircraft carriers. They get in the way. And so security brings a totally different dimension to commercial operations that have not really been considered. What is important to commercial vessels, that areas of security concern are highlighted and broadcast, and that ship operators take note and do not arbitrarily risk their crews in these regions because it will cost them more money to protect the ships. And unfortunately, in a cynical world, with commercial ship operators, a lot of the time it comes down to money. If you have to, ask you a question. If you have to lock all the doors to ensure that you are safe and secure from pirates, but you have an internal accommodation fire, what judgment would you make? Is it safer to secure yourself from the pirates, or safer to be more exposed to the pirates and be able to cope with an internal emergency? It is a very difficult situation. Fatigue. Another couple of questions, and this is very prominent with the situation with COVID-19. We know that fatigue is one of the causes of accidents on board. So more rules. What do you think must be done to ensure the Maritime Labour Convention is fulfilled by companies in order to avoid fatigue on board the ships? And are there any effective action plans to reduce stress and fatigue due to long-term confinement? This is actually becoming a very contentious subject. There is no doubt fatigue is a killer. There are numerous studies on this subject, including our own, and that was our study with University College London about 2 years ago. That's also available on our website. Fatigue affects perception, and that affects critical decision making. And the current international legislation is ludicrous. It allows for non-stop work of 12 hours every day for the duration of the tour of duty. And if that tour is 12 months long, that means the sailor does not get a day off in 12 months working an 84-hour week. So whoever's listening to me talk about this, would you take a job like that? Would you really take a job where you didn't have a day off in even 6 months? But that is the situation that many seafarers are facing. And what we have from the MLC, we have an hours of rest legislation. So a maximum hours of work shall not exceed 14 hours in any 24-hour period and 72 hours in any 7-day period. However, what they've done is they've given a minimum hours of rest, which is, frankly, what companies work to, and it's a worse situation. Minimum hours 77 hours in any 7-day period. That's 11 hours rest a day, minimum hours rest in a 7-day period. And what that means is for 1 week, you can actually work 91 hours for that week. Well, I don't know who's up for that, who wants that particular job. And 6 on, 6 off, 6 hours on, 6 hours off is still ongoing with many maritime operations, even though there is huge objection to this particular work routine continuing. And I have to tell you, I work 6 on, 6 off so much of my time at sea, and it is utterly exhausting. But what this has produced, what this fatigue has produced, is male seafarers have some of the highest mortality rates due to alcohol, drugs, and sexual habits. Seafarers are reportedly more obese than shoreside workers, and tragically, greater numbers take their own lives than many people working in other occupations. The exact figures are difficult to come by, but the general picture is that seafarers' work can have a significant deleterious consequence for an individual's longevity, health, and well-being. And I'm going to take an example. I got my eye on the clock, but I'm going to take an example from a report by Professor Zhao of Dalian Maritime College. And Professor Zhao actually translates our Chinese feedback for us. And she did a study in 2016 comparing 21st century shipping working week to 1890 in industry in the UK. And what she found was that in 1890, the typical hours worked in British industry were between 52 and 57 hours a week. And for a modern seafarer, that typical working week is over 60 hours long. And what she concluded was seafarers work on average 8 hours more a week now than British factories did 130 years ago. Now, the added complication to this is the Safe Manning Certificate, which you should also read, Minimum Manning Certificate, which has been designed to accommodate minimum personnel required to work 6 hours on, 6 hours off. The regulators have approved these incredibly low crew numbers, and some ship owners threaten to switch the flag of their vessels if the regulators do not approve. And that means that ship's crews have not been cut to the bone. They've actually been cut below what most of us would be considered safe. Chirp Maritime regularly receives reports from mariners who have violated their hours of rest periods and are yet forced or coerced into falsifying records. For your information, a seafarer must maintain a record of his hours of rest, and it's his responsibility. If he falsifies the records, it is a criminal offence against the seafarer. So you have a situation where the seafarer is working excess hours, and that is more than 12 hours a day, has falsified his records in order to keep his job, and if he's discovered, he will be prosecuted. And we get many reports like this, and the regulator, such as the flag state, seem to be powerless or unwilling to intervene. It is a shocking situation. Ocean sustainability. We had a few questions a few days ago. Can we suggest how ocean sustainability is related to the concepts of maritime security? So what you're seeing there, by the way, are major oil spills probably over the last 50 years, because the Torrey Canyon, I can see, was in the mid-1960s, and all the others have been since then. So these are really major tanker disasters. Okay, so I'll move on quickly. So these are some statistics from the United Nations then. Oceans cover 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Over 3 billion people, 3 billion, depend on marine and coastal biodiversity for their livelihoods. The oceans contain nearly 200,000 identified species, but the actual numbers may lay in millions. Oceans absorb 30% of carbon dioxide produced by humans, buffering the impacts of global warming. Oceans serve as the world's largest source of protein, with more than 3 billion people depending on the oceans as their primary source of protein. Marine fisheries directly or indirectly employ over 200 million people. And coastal waters are deteriorating due to pollution and eutrophication. Without concerted efforts, the eutrophication is expected to increase 20% by over 30 years. So the ocean drives global systems that make the Earth habitable for humankind. Rainwater, drinking water, weather, climate, coastlines, food, oxygen that we breathe are ultimately provided and regulated by the sea. So careful management of this essential global resource is a key feature of a sustainable future. However, there is a continuous deterioration of coastal waters and ocean acidification, which has an adversarial effect on ecosystems. So saving our ocean must remain a priority, and marine biodiversity is critical to the health of people and our planet. And finally, we look at Chirp Maritime and the possibility of perspective in programs and partnerships with Brazil. Well, Chirp Maritime believes that the promotion of safety to as wide an audience as possible is hugely important when it comes down to reducing the number of accidents and incidents that we see on a daily basis. I actually was sent a video on Monday of a Brazilian pilot on his way down a rope pilot ladder, a very big ship. I won't say what port. And as it was a very big swell, probably 3 meters, maybe more. He went to step on the pilot boat, lost his footing, and was straight into the sea. He did not die, but it was a nasty accident. And pilot security is a very major issue around the world. And that was actually a Brazilian incident, I think, last week, and I got the video Monday. So we have taken the steps to try and enter into the Brazilian maritime world, and we try to produce our feedback in Portuguese. We hope you read it and disseminate it. And we are open-minded people, and we're very open to suggestions. If you feel we could help you in some way, we will certainly look at it. There are only 4 of us that run Chirp Maritime, all on a part-time basis, but we have established ourselves as a major global force. We have global visibility, and we are growing every year. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me. Hello, Victor, are you there? No, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for the lecture. We have a few questions here sent by the audience during the presentation. And as you said, piracy is one of the favorites. I'm going to begin with Marcelo Martins. He has a comment here. I'd like to tell you something regarding piracy here in Rio de Janeiro. In 2015, I was working for Hornbeck Offshore. I was on board of the PSV HOS Wild Wing under the American flag. I was the second engineer. There was a time when we were at anchor in Bahia de Guanabara, and the risk of piracy was real. Criminals were using small boats to climb on board to attack the crew. Does it constitute piracy?
Yeah, yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. That definitely falls within the definition now of piracy. I would say when I first went to sea in the mid-70s, we would deal with local thefts in rivers in all around the place. We would have our own sailors with, frankly, wooden handles, and we'd whack them with them. But these days, the pirates are armed. They were never armed then. And now life seems to be a lot more violent than it was 40 years ago. So I would say, yes, Marcel, that's piracy.
Okay. So I have a question regarding commercial ship activity and the impacts on the environment. Do you believe that in the near future it will be possible to reduce emissions of commercial ships by the adoption of filters or alternative fuels, or is it possible that the pandemic will postpone those measures?
I know actually there's a huge push on this to reduce sulfur content in heavy fuel oil. It's a big thing, and with in particular Europe, the EU has imposed much stricter emission controls. So, and this is having an effect on global ship construction, passenger ships. There is also an issue with particulate pollution. In other words, what the seafarers breathe in. And so my answer to that is there is huge pressure to clean up the act at sea. There really is, yeah.
Well, we have a question here on unmanned ships from Diana Venancio. We now have regulations about drones, non-tripulated aircraft. In this context, I would like to know if there are discussions about regulation of non-tripulated ships or vessels.
Yeah, actually, this is gathering momentum. People, a lot of mariners, particularly of my generation who's still at sea, are refusing to accept that automated vessels are possible and that it's feasible. But I can tell you it is gathering momentum at some pace. And what people have to realize is it is not about the adapting of existing ships. Ships will be designed and built to be autonomous. So they're not going to look like ships look like now. And already, I can't think of the name of the company. There is a German passenger ship company where the engine rooms are autonomous and controlled from shoreside. A shoreside control room, unbelievable. And so there are already many committees and government initiatives to draw up the rules. And there are quite a few autonomous vessels out there already. You would be surprised at what's being tested and how fast this is gathering momentum.
Perfect. We have a question here of, it is regarding Chirp Maritime. A member of the audience wants to know exactly how does it, what is the purpose of the company, of the institution? How do you work? And
okay, so what we do, what we're finding is that mariners who have safety concerns, we always encourage them to use their internal safety reporting system. But what we know, it's absolutely established fact, is that many are too frightened to go to their DPA, the designated person ashore, because they get identified as a troublemaker and removed off the ship. We have numerous cases of this. So they give us a confidential report on extremely bad safety practices, and you would be utterly shocked at what goes on, the exploitation, in particular of seafarers from the developing world. And so they send us reports, and some of these work for big established companies. And when we get hold of the company, they are embarrassed and horrified that these practices are going on their ships, and they stop it. So that's what we're for. We're a confidential reporting system, and we get many successes from taking on safety issues that otherwise would not be addressed.
Perfect. I'm seeing if we have any further questions.
What I would say to you, Victor, is that we also make a lot of enemies along the way. A lot of companies don't like us for challenging them, but that is what we have to do. And so whilst it isn't always a friendly exchange, and a lot of companies and institutions don't like us because we rattle their cages. And that's what we're here for.
We have here just a comment from Marcel also. I think it responded you, Jeffrey. Yes, I know that DOF has already prepared an autonomous prototype vessel in Norway. It is amazing. Actually, a comment. And Me, Caroline, again. I have a question. Actually, it's just I want to ask you if you can talk a bit about the difference between exploration and exploitation, because you just said this word, and in one of the lines of research at PPGEM, we have this discussion, but it's I think the discussion that is not presented to all the students. So if you can comment something about the use of these definitions.
Is that exploitation? Is
yeah,
that...
exactly.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, I can tell you now that shipping has never changed. And although the UK used to be a massive, has always been a massive maritime nation, it isn't now. And what I can tell you is that shipping companies will always chase the lower cost seafarer. And as I speak to you now, the lowest cost seafarers are the Filipinos. There's something like 400,000 merchant seafarers from the Philippines. The Chinese, there's something like 300,000 Chinese. And the cheapest of all are the Vietnamese. They are the cheapest seafarer you can get at the moment. And of course, these countries or the seafarers are poor. They're poor people. And they go to sea as the best way they can to make money to live. And the exploitation is because there are so many of them, to get a ship can be very difficult. So if they complain about their conditions, they are removed from the ship and they will not go to sea again. And these men do, on average, 9-month trips. Now, 9 months is a horrendous, for me, it is an outrageous amount of time, especially in today's ships, which it's difficult for me to explain. If you haven't been there, it used to be fun to go to sea. I went to sea as an adventure, as a young man, and there was a bar, there was a social side of it. The ships were in port. Now ships don't go to port. They're so far out of port that there's nothing for them to see. They're not allowed to drink and socialize. There's not many crew. They work terrible hours, and they don't do it for very much money. So if they complain about the conditions that they do have, they are removed off the ship. And sometimes they're charged for the air flight as well, which takes about 50% of their salary. So that is exploitation, where you abuse, you don't treat that person with humanity and respect. That is exploitation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
But we have a question here from Garcia. He's asking if there is a relationship between the informations gathered on safety regarding internal security of the ships and security, external menaces like piracy and terrorism. So yeah. He's asking on the relationship between the two concepts.
Okay, that's very interesting. Most merchant seafarers have never come into contact with security issues. If you are at sea long enough, you come across, and you are a global trader, you will have emergencies. You'll have fires and deaths on board. You will go through the occasional war zone in your career. But for most seafarers who perhaps do 10 years at sea, they might see nothing, and they're certainly not exposed to security issues. They're not military people. They're not trained in any way to be military. They are civilians. And the sudden exposure to potential serious violence is a shock, particularly as ships are not allowed to arm up. You're not allowed to carry guns, and it's an unequal platform. And therefore, the captain, he wants his job. The crew want to keep their job. They want to get in and out of that area as fast as possible. So the company, if they're at all decent, will provide you with security information of the region. And there are various intelligence organizations that will supply you with information if you're going to go into that area. But often as not, the ships are completely inexperienced in it, completely inexperienced.
So, we are waiting for a new question from Garcia.
Garcia is asking to respond with his audio. Let me just put him here. You can comment, Garcia.
Good afternoon. First of all, it was a pleasure to listen to your presentation. My question, I'm studying about the security maritime in Middle East.
Oh yeah,
especially near to Lebanon, Israel, Cyprus, in this area. Okay, and my question is about the relationship, because normally when you have the safety information, this is an indicator that I don't know exactly the percent, but it's the indicator about the security maritime, terrorism, piracy. So in this area, we have a mix with these factors, no? In my opinion, and it's difficult to analyze the threat in this area, because it's indefinite.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know, but I think that if you have information about safety, I think it's an indicator. No, I don't know, but different. I have to a conscience that these factors are different, safety and security. But I think that there is a relationship. What do you think about it?
Yeah, well, you've actually got quite a difficult one there, because you mentioned Cyprus, and to my knowledge, there's no piracy off Cyprus, although it's extremely close to Syria, and there is a lot.
Yes. No. Yes. I'm confused about the no piracy. Smuggling. Smuggling guns.
We're not talking. Okay.
Not piracy. Piracy in Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now you're talking about different business, because the Eastern Mediterranean is for. There are. How can I put this? There is a lot of illegal activity running across the North African coast to the Lebanon and possibly, I have to be careful on my words, some of the Turkish ports. But, you know, this is you are moving in a very sensitive area here, because we're talking about illegal arms shipments. That's the sort of thing you're talking about, Libya and that sort of thing, as it transits. And what I can tell you, absolutely, is that there are blacklisted ships, and we do get reports. Basically, exactly. We get reports of crew with very serious welfare conditions. Now, we have a partnership with some welfare organizations, as we don't deal with welfare, but we do. They come to us with the safety issue, such as pumping oil out over the side at night. But then it turns out that the ships are registered in the Lebanon and are trading between the Ukraine and Libya. And these ports will not report any defects. There is a specific reason these ships are operating the way they are. So if that's what you're talking about, that is very much an intelligence-led topic. which is not really in the public domain. But you are absolutely right. It is definitely going on.
Yeah. Okay, I understood. I participated of the UNIFIL mission in Lebanon, so twice. So I understood that you said.
These ships can be anonymous, and as long as they stay in the grey ports of, some of them are Egypt and Libya and the Ukraine, they'll never get stopped. That's quite a sensitive subject.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We have a question here from Rita Feodripe. She's asking about your opinion on threats imposed to the maritime security obligations to which Brazil is committed.
I'm not sure what, I don't know what Brazil is committed to. Other than I can say from personal experience, the Brazilian Navy always struck me as very at the forefront. They were very proactive, but I don't know what the Brazilian Navy is committed to. But they were, in my opinion, as a commercial mariner operating in Brazil, they were quite a strict regime and very noticeable. They definitely had a presence on commercial ships, whereas many countries do not. So I probably can't really give you a good answer on that one.
Perfect. Well, we have a question here from Raquel. She is a researcher at the Brazilian Naval War College, and she works with satellite monitoring and environmental conflicts at the coastal areas and ecological corridors.
Okay.
She's asking about the perspective of technical cooperation with Brazil and investments in projects of satellite monitoring and conflict management on sea.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, because what I do know, I don't know if the that person is aware of an organization called the Pew Trust. That's PEW Trust. And the Pew Trust is possibly the biggest charity in the United States. It's a family trust. They're worth $5 billion in assets, and they have their own satellite over the Southern Ocean. And that their particular field of expertise or their interest is researching and monitoring illegal fishing activities of the Southern Ocean. And that's what that satellite is for. And they track fishing vessels, which they believe are financed by organized crime. So I don't have too much knowledge on satellite technology, but that is definitely going on with the Pew Trust. And that person may wish to make contact with them, I'm not sure.
Perfect. I wrote the name here on the chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if we should wait for new questions or.
Well, I'm happy to wrap it up.
Okay.
It's getting done.
I think we have another question from Marcelo, or I don't know if it's just comments. We'll have to check here in the chat, please.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to read
2 or 3 comments above.
Yes, Marcelo Martins is writing here. I think you all remember when there was something like a big disaster in Philippines in 2014. I was on board and the crew was multicultural. We had satellite cable TV and I saw in front of my eyes the Filipino bosom shocked, watching the CNN, the devastation of the place he used to live. He lost everything and life on board was the only thing left to him. There are Filipinos here in Brazil for more than 6 months on board to save money for their families. As you told us before, they leave their very poor countries on quest for better living. We know the date they are leaving, but they are unable to tell when they're going to come back leaving. But we are unable to tell when they will come back to their homes.
Yeah, I accept all of that. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it's never been so bad as it is at the moment. Yeah, Marcelo is correct.
Yes, this very year we had a situation with even with aircraft carriers from the United States, right? They had to dock in Guam and Japan, and they had to stay on board. They didn't get to leave the ship.
Yeah, if you're confined, I mean, they have 5,000 men on those ships, and they don't have any privacy at all. So to be contained on a ship like that must be horrendous. But it's happening with passenger ships, Now here's one for you all that I bet you've never considered. The reason I put up the Symphony of the Seas is that ship has 7,000 passengers and 2,000 crew. So it has 9,000 people on board if it was fully laden. Now, this is the worst case scenario that nobody is talking about it, and this is for you. There are many of these very large cruise ships. The next one has about 6,000 passengers. 5,000 to 6,000 people is an average very large cruise ship. Symphony of the Seas is extraordinary. This is the worst case scenario. These two ships collide. 14,000 people in the water. Consider it. How you can help.
Yes.
Yeah, 14,000 people in the water. It's the worst nightmare for the cruise industry, and they have come very close to such disasters.
Yes.
So I'll leave you with that thought anyway, to give that consideration. Obviously, cruise industry tends not to like us.
Of course. Well, we have a question here from Diego Lima regarding the refugee crisis. Does Chirp receive many alerts regarding refugee rescue, and how does Chirp cope with that? Is there any protocol to undergo?
No, we don't get any. We don't get anything.
Any?
Or we haven't received. I would say that's more of a welfare situation, and there are some very big and excellent international welfare organizations, the biggest being, or one of the major ones being ISWAN, ISWAN, who we have a big partnership with, and they have 24-hour telephone lines. They have a whole team of multilingual experts on the phones, and they deal with this. Oh, have I lost you?
Yeah, yes, we have some problem with your camera.
Okay, perhaps a good time to wrap this up.
Yeah, I think we are okay with the questions.
Okay.
Jeffrey, okay, Victor is back.
Do you hear me?
Jessica, our president is going to. Yes, I can hear you, Victor. She's gonna do a final word, but before that, me, Carolina, as I was the one who sent you all the previous questions we had, I want to thank you, because I think you covered very well all the subjects that were sent to us. Your presentation was very objective, so I think I'm pretty sure everybody could learn a lot in a very organized way, and I'm very glad about that. Thank you so much. So Jessica.
Thank you for presentation. I always say that I guess that in all areas we have more questions than conclusions. So being in this space of conversation, of sharing, it's valuable for all of us to evolve in our personal and professional life. So thank you for your availability. for being here and sharing so much with us. I guess Victor have some words to end this moment.
Yes, as we run out of time, I believe that at this moment the alumni should probably give Captain Jeff Parfitt a gift or a certificate for your presentation, but given the circumstances, we're going to send a PDF file via email. We would like to thank Captain Parfitt very much for the presentation. It was for kindly accepting our invitation, and it was an honor to listen to the lecture. And I'm sure that it was extremely instructive to the audience as well. Thank you everyone for watching the first edition of this webinar series, and we hope to keep a sustained communication with Captain Parfitt and Chirp Maritime for future collaborations. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the generous invite, and now everyone can wake up after hearing me speak for an hour. But if any of you want, if you want to make contact, just look at our website and or take the email off Victor, and we will do our best to help you. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. I think I enjoyed it.
No.
Well, be sure to.
For sure.
Okay.
It was not hard listen to you by 1 hour. It was a pleasure.
Okay, I've just got to figure out how to sign off, and that's it. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Jéssica,
Oiê.
aguarde
Oi,
que
estamos...
por favor.
Balanço pós-evento. Calma aí, deixa eu cancelar, que eu tava quase saindo. Cadê o Vitor? Gente, deu para entender alguma coisa que eu falei do início?
Só o pessoal terminar de sair que eu termino aqui a gravação.
Tá.